The gunshot that killed Lucia Garrison's father didn't just shatter the morning quiet of Jackson, Wyoming in 1878. It shattered every mirror in their small cabin, and Lucia swore she would never look at her reflection again. She stood over the broken glass scattered across the wooden floor, her father's body still warm on the porch outside where the outlaws had left him. The mirrors had been her mother's pride before consumption took her 3 years prior, and now they lay in jagged pieces that caught the harsh mountain sunlight streaming through the windows. Lucia was 21 years old, alone in the world, and convinced that any face capable of witnessing such horror had no right to be seen, least of all by herself. The townspeople of Jackson helped bury her father beside her mother on the hill, overlooking the Snake River. They offered condolences and casseroles, speaking in hushed tones about the 3 men who had demanded her father's gold claim and shot him when he refused. Marshal Peters promised justice, but Lucia heard the doubt in his voice. The mountains surrounding Jackson were vast and unforgiving, perfect for desperate men to disappear into. After the funeral, Lucia returned to the cabin and covered every reflective surface she could find. The kettle got turned to face the wall. The good china plates her mother had brought from Pennsylvania were wrapped in cloth and stored in the cellar. When she washed her face in the basin each morning, she kept her eyes fixed on her hands, never letting her gaze drift upward to catch even a glimpse of herself in the water's surface. People in town began to notice her peculiar habit. She would turn away from shop windows, keep her head down when passing by the saloon's large mirror, and refuse to try on hats at the millinery because it required looking in a glass. Mrs. Henderson at the general store remarked that Lucia had become like a ghost, present, but somehow not quite there, avoiding her own existence. 3 weeks after her father's death, Lucia realized she had no way to maintain the homestead alone. The claim required regular work to keep it valid, and she lacked the physical strength to mine or the knowledge to manage the equipment properly. She posted a notice at the general store seeking help, offering room and board plus a percentage of any findings in exchange for labor and protection. Days passed with no response. Most men in Jackson had their own claims or worked for the larger mining operations. Those who didn't were often the type Lucia wouldn't trust within 100 yards of her property. She was beginning to accept that she would have to sell everything and move to a bigger town, perhaps Cheyenne, or even back east to her mother's relatives in Philadelphia, when Isaac Hartley walked into the general store. He had to duck under the doorframe, his massive shoulders nearly brushing both sides of the entrance. His dark hair hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was thick but neatly trimmed. The buckskin shirt he wore strained against muscles built from years of surviving in the wilderness, and his eyes, a startling pale blue, swept the room with the careful attention of a man who had learned to note every detail of his surroundings. He carried a rifle slung over his back and a hunting knife at his belt, but it was the quiet confidence in his movements that made everyone in the store pause and watch him. Isaac Hartley was a legend in these parts, though few people in Jackson had ever seen him. He lived somewhere high in the Teton Range, coming down to civilization perhaps twice a year to trade furs and buy supplies. Trappers who ventured into the high country sometimes spotted his camp, always in a different location, always cleverly hidden. He was said to be able to track anything that moved, survive on nothing but what the land provided, and once fought off a grizzly bear with just his knife. Whether all the stories were true, no one could say for certain, but looking at the size and bearing of the man, Lucia found them entirely believable. Isaac approached the counter where Mr. Henderson was measuring out cornmeal for another customer. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly soft for such a large man, roughened by disuse but clear in its intent. "I need powder, shot, salt, flour, and whatever vegetables you have that will keep." Also, there was a notice in the window. Mr. Henderson practically tripped over himself to help the mountain man, gathering supplies while Isaac read the notice Lucia had posted. His blue eyes lingered on each word before he carefully unpinned it from the board and turned to survey the store. His gaze found Lucia standing near the bolts of fabric, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "You are Lucia Garrison?" he asked, moving toward her with surprising grace for someone so large. Lucia nodded, forcing herself to keep her chin up even as every instinct told her to look away. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a calm assessment that somehow felt less invasive than the pitying looks she had endured from the townsfolk. "I knew your father," Isaac said. "Not well, but I traded with him a few times. He was an honest man. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Lucia managed, her throat tight. "Are you interested in the position?" Isaac glanced at the notice in his hand. "Room and board plus a percentage. The claim is the one up Miller Creek." "Yes, my father filed it 2 years ago. There is a cabin, a sluice box, and some basic equipment. I cannot work it alone, and I cannot afford to hire someone outright." "Have you had other interested parties?" Lucia shook her head. "You are the first to inquire." Something shifted in Isaac's expression, a subtle softening around his eyes. He folded the notice carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I will take a look at the claim. If it seems promising, I will work it through the summer and into fall. 20% of whatever we find, plus room and board as stated. I provide my own rifle and ammunition for hunting. We split the meat." The practicality of his terms, delivered without negotiation or attempt to take advantage, made Lucia's decision easy. "That is acceptable. When can you start?" "Tomorrow at dawn. I need to collect my gear from my camp." They shook hands on it, and Lucia was surprised by the gentleness of his grip, despite the calluses she felt against her palm. Isaac returned to the counter to complete his purchases, and Lucia left the store with something she had not felt in weeks, a small, fragile thread of hope. That evening, she cleaned the cabin thoroughly, preparing the small back room that had been her father's. She changed the bedding, swept the floors, and made a venison stew from the last of the meat in the cold cellar. As she worked, she caught herself almost glancing at the covered mirror in the main room and jerked her eyes away. The habit of avoiding her reflection had become so ingrained that even the thought of seeing herself made her chest tight with anxiety. Isaac arrived just as the sun was cresting the mountains to the east, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies and gear. In the better light, Lucia could see that he was likely around 30 years old, his face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged, uncompromising way. He moved with the economy of motion common to men who lived in the wild, nothing wasted, every action purposeful. He settled his mule in the small barn beside her father's old mule, Jasper, and spent the morning examining the claim with thoroughness that impressed Lucia. He checked the structural integrity of the sluice box, tested the creek flow, and hiked up the hillside to examine the rock faces and existing dig sites. Lucia accompanied him, answering questions about her father's methods and findings. By midday, Isaac had a plan. "Your father was working the right areas, but he was one man doing the labor of 3. The real potential is further up the creek, where the bedrock narrows. It will require heavy digging, but the gold deposits should be richer." "How can you tell?" Lucia asked. Isaac crouched beside the creek, his large hands sifting through gravel with surprising delicacy. "See these stones? They have been rounded by water, carried down from somewhere higher up. The gold travels with them, settling in cracks and crevices in the bedrock. Your father found decent color here in the lower sections, which means better deposits upstream. Over the following days, Isaac proved to be everything Lucia could have hoped for in a partner. He worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk, moving earth and rock with a strength that seemed almost inhuman. He expanded the sluice box system, built a more efficient rocker box, and began the laborious process of digging test holes further up the creek. In the evenings, he hunted, bringing back elk, deer, and once, a string of trout from a hidden pool he found high in the hills. Lucia handled the cooking, washing, and the lighter work of processing the gravel through the sluice boxes. She also kept careful records of their findings, noting the location and amount of gold dust and small nuggets they recovered. It was not a fortune, but it was promising better than her father had managed alone. Isaac spoke little, but his silence was comfortable rather than oppressive. When he did talk, it was usually to share some piece of knowledge about the land, which plants were edible, how to read weather signs in the clouds where mountain lions liked to den. Lucia found herself listening with genuine interest, appreciating the way he explained things without condescension, as though her understanding mattered. One evening, about 2 weeks after Isaac's arrival, Lucia was washing dishes in the basin when she realized she could see a faint reflection in the water. She froze, her hands submerged, staring at the distorted image of a face she barely recognized. Before she could think, she dumped the basin out the window and stood breathing hard, her heart racing. Isaac, who had been sitting at the table cleaning his rifle, looked up. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Lucia said too quickly. "The water was too dirty. I need to get fresh." She grabbed the bucket and fled to the creek, where she filled it with shaking hands. The cool mountain air helped steady her nerves, but she felt foolish for her reaction. It was just water, just a reflection. Why did it terrify her so much? When she returned to the cabin, Isaac had made coffee and poured her a cup. He said nothing about her strange behavior, simply slid the cup across the table in a silent offer of comfort. Lucia sat down and wrapped her hands around the warm tin, grateful for his discretion. "My mother died when I was 12, Isaac said suddenly, his voice low. "My father took it hard, started drinking. One night he wandered into a blizzard and did not come back. I found him in the spring after the thaw." Lucia looked up, surprised by this unexpected revelation. Isaac's eyes were fixed on his coffee, but she could see the old pain etched in the lines around his mouth. "I blamed myself for a long time," he continued. "Thought maybe if I had been stronger, better at hunting, able to provide more, he would not have felt the need to drown his grief. I left civilization, went into the mountains and stayed there, figured I did not deserve to be around people." "What changed?" Lucia asked softly. Isaac met her eyes, and she saw something ancient and weary in his gaze. "Time, and the realization that punishing yourself does not honor the dead. It just makes the living suffer more." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lucia felt exposed, as though Isaac had somehow seen through her careful defenses to the guilt and fear she carried. She wanted to protest, to insist her situation was different, but the words would not come. Instead, she said, "Thank you for telling me." Isaac nodded once and returned his attention to his rifle, and they finished the evening in companionable silence. As the weeks passed, the partnership between Lucia and Isaac deepened into something that resembled friendship. They developed routines and rhythms, learning to anticipate each other's needs and preferences. Isaac took to leaving wildflowers on the table when he returned from checking his trap lines: columbines, lupines, Indian paintbrush, small splashes of color that brightened the cabin. Lucia began baking bread more frequently, knowing Isaac had a particular fondness for it with honey. The gold claim continued to yield modest but steady returns. They found a rich pocket in the bedrock upstream that kept them busy for nearly a week, carefully extracting the precious metal from crevices with patient precision. Isaac suggested they take their accumulated gold to town for weighing and deposit in the bank, and Lucia agreed, relieved to have someone she trusted to accompany her. The trip to Jackson revealed how much the townspeople's perception of Lucia had changed. With Isaac at her side, she was no longer the tragic orphan to be pitied, but rather a capable woman with a formidable partner. Men who might have tried to swindle her on the gold's value took one look at Isaac's imposing presence and offered fair prices. Even Marshal Peters seemed more optimistic about tracking down her father's killers, though Lucia suspected this was more about not wanting to appear incompetent in front of the mountain man. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson insisted on showing Lucia the new fabrics that had arrived from the East. "You should make yourself a new dress, dear," she said with the kind of aggressive kindness that was difficult to refuse. "That one is getting quite worn." Lucia glanced down at her dress, a simple brown calico that had indeed seen better days. Mrs. Henderson was already pulling out bolts of cloth, including a beautiful blue cotton with tiny white flowers that reminded Lucia of the alpine meadows near the claim. "It would look lovely with your coloring," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Here, stand in front of the mirror and see." Panic seized Lucia's chest. "No, thank you, I am sure it is fine." "Nonsense, you must see how it looks." Mrs. Henderson was already holding the fabric up to Lucia's shoulder, trying to position her in front of the large mirror behind the counter. Lucia jerked away, nearly knocking over a display of canned goods. "I said no." The store went silent. Mrs. Henderson looked hurt and confused. Mr. Henderson emerged from the back room, frowning at the commotion. Lucia felt her face burning, could sense every eye in the store fixed on her strange outburst. Then Isaac was there, his presence like a wall between her and the curious stares. "We will take 3 yards of the blue fabric," he said calmly to Mrs. Henderson, "and 2 yards of the white muslin. No need for the mirror." His matter-of-fact tone diffused the tension, turning Lucia's panic into mere eccentricity. Mrs. Henderson recovered quickly, measuring and cutting the fabric with professional efficiency, and the other customers returned to their business with only a few sidelong glances. Outside, Lucia leaned against the hitching post, trying to steady her breathing. Isaac loaded their purchases onto his mule without comment, giving her time to collect herself. "I am sorry," she finally said. "I do not know what came over me." Isaac checked the pack straps with careful attention, his back to her. "You do not need to apologize. Everyone carries their ghosts differently." The ride back to the claim was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. As they climbed the narrow trail beside Miller Creek, Lucia found herself thinking about Isaac's words. Ghosts. Yes, that was exactly what she was carrying, the ghost of the woman she had been before her father's murder, the ghost of the innocence and security she had lost, the ghost of a reflection she could no longer bear to see. That night, after supper, Lucia attempted to sew the blue fabric into a dress. Her stitching was adequate but uninspired, and after an hour of struggling with the bodice, she set the work aside with frustration. Isaac looked up from the piece of wood he was carving. "What is wrong?" "I am a terrible seamstress. My mother tried to teach me, but I never had the patience for it." What did you have patience for? The question surprised her. No one had asked her that in years. "Reading," she said slowly. "My father taught me. We had nearly 30 books, which was quite a collection. I have read them all multiple times." "What kind of books?" "Everything. Poetry, novels, natural philosophy, history. My favorite was a volume of Shakespeare's plays. I used to read them aloud and perform all the parts." She smiled at the memory, then felt the expression fade. How long had it been since she had smiled? Isaac set down his carving. "Would you read to me?" "Now, if you are willing. It has been a long time since I heard a story." Lucia retrieved the Shakespeare volume from her small collection on the shelf, its leather binding worn soft with handling. She settled into her chair and opened to The Tempest, one of her favorites, and began to read. Her voice was hesitant at first, rusty from disuse, but as she fell into the rhythm of the language, confidence returned. She found herself giving different voices to the characters, just as she had done for her father. Isaac listened with complete attention, his carving forgotten. When she finished the first act and paused, he said, "You have a gift for that. The words come alive when you read them." The compliment warmed her in a way she had not expected. "Thank you. Would you like me to continue?" "Very much." This became their new evening routine. After supper and the day's cleanup, Lucia would read while Isaac worked on various projects: carving, repairing equipment, crafting new tools. Sometimes he would ask questions about the stories, wanting clarification on unfamiliar words or historical context, and Lucia would explain as best she could. She found joy in these exchanges, in the sharing of knowledge and beauty that had sustained her through lonely years. One evening in late July, a summer storm rolled through the mountains, bringing fierce winds and sheets of rain that turned the creek into a churning brown torrent. Lucia and Isaac secured everything they could and retreated to the cabin, where the fire and thick log walls kept them safe and dry. Lucia made coffee, and they sat listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Lightning illuminated the mountains in stark flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the ground. "Does the storm worry you?" Isaac asked, noting the tension in Lucia's shoulders. "I have always been nervous around thunder," she admitted. "It is foolish, I know. Fear is rarely foolish. It keeps us cautious." Another crack of thunder, this one so close that Lucia flinched. Without thinking, she moved closer to Isaac on the bench, seeking the comfort of his solid presence. He did not pull away, instead shifting slightly to make room, and Lucia felt the warmth of his arm nearly touching hers. "Tell me something," she said, wanting distraction from the storm. "You said you have lived in the mountains for years. Do you never get lonely?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Yes," he finally said, "but loneliness seemed easier to bear than the alternative." "What alternative?" "Letting people close enough to lose them." The raw honesty in his voice made Lucia's chest ache. She understood that philosophy intimately had she not been living by the same principle, avoiding even her own reflection to escape the pain of truly seeing herself. "Is that why you came down from the mountains?" she asked. "To stop being lonely?" "No," Isaac said slowly. "I came down because I saw your notice and remembered your father, and it seemed like maybe I could do something useful. Maybe I could help someone instead of just hiding." "You are helping," Lucia said softly. "More than you know." Isaac turned to look at her, and in the firelight, his eyes seemed impossibly blue and infinitely deep. Lucia felt something shift between them, a recognition of their shared wounds and the tentative healing they had found in each other's company. The air felt charged, and not just from the storm. Then Isaac stood abruptly, moving to add wood to the fire with unnecessary vigor. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day if the creek is running high." The moment broke, leaving Lucia feeling oddly bereft. She bid him good night and retreated to her small bedroom, where she lay awake listening to the rain and wondering what might have happened if Isaac had not pulled away. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. The creek was indeed running high, muddy with runoff, and they could not work the sluices until the water cleared. Instead, Isaac suggested they use the day to hunt and gather supplies for the coming winter. They hiked high into the mountains, following game trails that wound through forests of lodgepole pine and aspen. Isaac moved through the wilderness with the confidence of a man in his element, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that were invisible to Lucia's untrained eyes. He pointed out edible plants and useful herbs, teaching her to identify them by leaf shape and smell. By midday, they had reached a high alpine meadow filled with wildflowers. A small lake nestled in a rocky bowl, its surface mirror smooth and reflecting the surrounding peaks with perfect clarity. Isaac knelt to drink, and Lucia did the same, the water so cold it made her teeth ache. "This is beautiful," she said, looking around at the pristine wilderness. "How did you find this place?" "I spent a winter in a cave near here, my second year in the mountains. It was a hard season, more snow than I had prepared for. I nearly did not survive." Isaac stood, gazing at the peaks. "But when spring came and I found this meadow, I understood why the land had tested me. Some things are worth suffering for." Lucia walked to the lake's edge, drawn by its crystalline beauty. She could see straight to the bottom, where smooth stones in shades of gray and white lined the floor. Trout moved in the shadows, dark shapes against pale rock. Then she saw her reflection. The surface of the lake was so still, so perfect, that her image appeared with startling clarity. Lucia froze, unable to look away yet unable to truly see. Her mind skittered away from the reality of her own face, refusing to process the details. "Look at it," Isaac said quietly. He had come to stand beside her, his reflection joining hers on the water's surface. "Look at yourself, Lucia." "I cannot," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists. "Why?" The question was simple but demanded an honest answer. Lucia felt tears prickling her eyes. "Because if I look, I will see the woman who survived when her parents died. The woman who was not good enough, strong enough, brave enough to save them. I will see all my failures reflected back at me." "Is that what you think you will see? What else is there?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said, "When I look at you, I see a woman who has endured terrible loss yet continues to move forward. I see someone who fights to keep her father's legacy alive, who treats a stranger with trust and kindness, who reads poetry with a passion that makes old words new. I see strength and grace and beauty." Lucia shook her head, the tears falling now. "You are kind, but look," Isaac said, his voice firm but gentle. "Please, look at yourself and tell me what you see." It was one of the hardest things Lucia had ever done, forcing her eyes to focus on the reflection in the water instead of sliding away. She saw a thin face, tanned from working outdoors, framed by dark hair that had come loose from its braid, brown eyes red-rimmed from crying, a mouth pressed tight with tension. "I see someone tired," she said. "Someone afraid. Look deeper." Lucia forced herself to keep looking, to really see beyond the surface details. She saw her mother's cheekbones, elegant despite the gauntness brought by meager eating and stress. Her father's determined chin. Her own eyes, which had once sparkled with curiosity and wonder, now guarded but not entirely dead. "I see my parents," she whispered. "I see them in me." "They live on in you," Isaac said. "Their strength, their courage, their love, that is what I see when I look at you." Something in Lucia's chest cracked open, a wall she had built stone by stone beginning to crumble. She stared at her reflection, and thought about the woman. She had been the girl who read Shakespeare and dreamed of adventures, the daughter who learned mining from her father and cooking from her mother, the person who had loved and been loved. That woman was still there, beneath the fear and grief. Scarred, yes. Changed, certainly. But not gone. Not erased. A breeze rippled across the lake, distorting her reflection into dancing fragments. When the water stilled again, Lucia thought she looked different somehow, though nothing physical had changed. Maybe it was just the knowledge that someone saw beauty where she had seen only failure. She looked up at Isaac, this mountain man who had come down from his solitary heights to help her, who shared his knowledge and his quiet strength, who treated her not as a victim to be pitied but as a partner to be respected. His face was serious, concerned, and in that moment Lucia realized she wanted to kiss him. The thought shocked her with its intensity and clarity. She wanted to feel his arms around her, to know the safety and warmth of his embrace. She wanted to fall asleep to the sound of his breathing and wake to find him still there. She wanted to build a life with this man who understood grief and healing, who lived with authenticity and courage. But before she could act on the impulse, Isaac stepped back, breaking the intimate moment. "We should check the trap lines," he said, his voice gruff. "Storm may have triggered them." Disappointment flooded through Lucia, but she nodded and followed him back into the forest. The rest of the day passed in relative silence, both of them caught in their own thoughts. That evening, Lucia could not focus on reading. She kept stumbling over words, losing her place, until finally she closed the book with a frustrated sigh. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked. "No," Lucia said, deciding that if she had learned anything from their conversation at the lake, it was that honesty mattered. "I am confused and frightened, and I do not know what to do about it." Isaac set down the new handle he was fitting to a pickaxe. "Confused about what?" Lucia took a breath, gathering her courage. "About you, about us, about what I am feeling." The cabin suddenly felt very small, the air thick with possibility. Isaac's expression was carefully neutral, but Lucia saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stilled on the wood. "What are you feeling?" he asked quietly. "Like I do not want this arrangement to be temporary," Lucia said, her heart pounding. "Like when you leave in the fall, you will take something essential with you, like I have been living in darkness and you brought light." Isaac closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Lucia saw longing and fear warring in their depths. "Lucia, I do not know how to be what you need. I need exactly what you are," she insisted. "Someone honest and kind and strong, someone who sees me. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are gentle with animals and patient when teaching. I know you work hard and keep your word. I know you came down from your mountain to help someone who needed it, asking for nothing but fair payment." She stood, moving closer to him. "I know that when I am with you, I feel safe. And today, for the first time in months, I looked at my reflection and did not feel only horror." Isaac stood as well, his height making her crane her neck to meet his eyes. "I am not civilized, Lucia. I am rough and I live hard, and I know more about surviving than about being happy." "Then learn," Lucia said simply. "Learn with me. We can figure it out together." For a long moment, Isaac just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out with one large, calloused hand and gently touched her cheek. The tenderness of the gesture made Lucia's breath catch. "You deserve better than a broken mountain man," he said softly. "You deserve better than loneliness and isolation," Lucia countered. "Let us both have better. Let us have each other." Isaac's resolve crumbled visibly. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a careful strength that made her feel infinitely precious. Lucia wrapped her arms around his broad back and pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and leather and something uniquely him. "I have been alone for so long," Isaac murmured into her hair. "I do not know if I remember how to be anything else." "Then we will figure it out together," Lucia repeated. "One day at a time." They stood like that for a long while, simply holding each other until the fire burned low and the darkness outside was complete. When they finally parted, Isaac kept one of Lucia's hands in his, as though afraid to lose the connection entirely. "I should not stay in the back room anymore," he said. "It is not proper, not now." Lucia felt a flush of warmth at the implication. "You are right. It is not proper for my husband to sleep in a separate room." Isaac's eyes widened. "Husband." "Eventually," Lucia amended, her cheeks burning but her gaze steady. "If you are willing. I know I am being forward, but I have lost too much to pretend I do not want this. I want you, Isaac Hartley. I want a life with you." A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, transforming his serious features into something approaching joy. "You are extraordinary," he said with wonder. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I will do my best to make you happy." "And I will do my best to make you happy," Lucia promised. Isaac pulled her close again and kissed her, gentle and reverent, as though she were something sacred. Lucia melted into the kiss, her hands clutching his shirt, her whole being singing with rightness. This was what she had needed, not just safety or partnership, but love. Real, messy, complicated, beautiful love. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I will build us a proper house," he said. "Something solid that will last. And I will never leave you, not unless death takes me." "No talk of death tonight," Lucia said, smiling. "Tonight we celebrate life." They stayed up late, talking about the future they would build together. Isaac spoke of expanding the claim, perhaps bringing in more equipment in the spring. Lucia suggested they could use some of the gold to buy more books, maybe even start a small library for the scattered families around Jackson. They discussed children. Isaac wanted at least 2. Lucia thought 3 would be nice, and what they would teach them about honor and courage and kindness. As the night deepened, Isaac made a pallet near the fire and insisted Lucia take the bedroom. "Until we are properly married," he said firmly, "I will not compromise your reputation." Lucia wanted to argue that her reputation had already weathered worse scandals, but she appreciated his principled stance. Instead, she kissed him good night and retreated to her room, where she lay in the darkness feeling happier than she had in years. The next weeks passed in a haze of joy and hard work. They continued mining the claim with renewed energy, their labor punctuated by stolen kisses and lingering touches. Isaac began work on an addition to the cabin, framing out 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. Neighbors who visited to trade or socialize noticed the change in their relationship and responded with warm congratulations, though a few raised eyebrows at the speed of their courtship. "Love does not run on a schedule," Lucia told Mrs. Henderson when the older woman expressed concern about hasty decisions. "I know my heart and I know Isaac's. That is enough." In mid-August, Marshal Peters rode up to the claim with news. They had caught the men who killed Lucia's father. The trial would be in 2 weeks in Jackson, and Lucia would need to testify. The news hit Lucia like a physical blow. She had almost managed to move beyond the horror of that morning, to build a new life on top of the grief. Now she would have to relive it, to face the men who had destroyed her family. Isaac took her hand firmly. "I will be with you every moment," he promised. "You will not face this alone." The trial was held in the largest room of the Jackson Hotel, converted temporarily into a courtroom. The 3 men, hardened outlaws with mean eyes and sneering mouths, sat in chains while the judge, a circuit rider from Cheyenne, presided over proceedings. Lucia testified clearly, describing that terrible morning in detail. She identified the men, recounted their demands and her father's refusal, and confirmed what the marshal had already established through investigation. The defense attorney, a weary man who seemed to be going through the motions, asked few questions. Throughout it all, Isaac sat directly behind her, his presence a steady anchor. Whenever Lucia faltered, she could feel his support like a warm hand on her back, giving her strength to continue. The verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced each man to hang, setting the execution for 2 days hence. Lucia felt no triumph in the verdict, only a weary sense that justice, while necessary, could not undo the damage done. After the trial, she and Isaac walked to the hill where her parents were buried. The graves were well tended with wildflowers growing around the simple wooden markers. Lucia knelt between them, placing her hands on the sun-warmed earth. "It is done, Papa," she said softly. "They will pay for what they did, and I am not alone anymore. I found someone good, someone who sees me. I think you would like him." Isaac stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy for her goodbyes. When Lucia finally stood and turned to him, tears streaming down her face, he opened his arms and held her while she wept. "I wish they could meet you," she said against his chest. "I wish they could know I will be all right." "They know," Isaac said with conviction. "Parents always want their children to be happy and safe. They know and they approve." 2 days later, the 3 men were hanged in the town square. Lucia did not attend, feeling no need to witness their deaths. Instead, she and Isaac went to the church and spoke with Reverend Thomas about a wedding. "I can perform the ceremony next Sunday if you like," the Reverend offered. He was a kind man in his 50s who had known Lucia since her family first arrived in Jackson. "We will make it a proper celebration." The town could use some joy. They were married on a brilliant Sunday morning in late August, with what seemed like half of Jackson in attendance. Lucia wore a new dress made from the blue fabric Isaac had bought, altered and finished by Mrs. Henderson, who refused any payment, calling it a wedding gift. Isaac wore new trousers and a white shirt, his hair neatly trimmed though still long, his beard shaped close to his jaw. As they stood before Reverend Thomas and exchanged vows, Lucia felt the weight of the past months finally lift from her shoulders. She was no longer an orphan, no longer alone, no longer defined by loss. She was a wife, a partner, a woman choosing her own future. When Isaac kissed her to seal their marriage, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward featured music, dancing, and more food than Lucia had seen in one place since before her mother's death. Isaac, who claimed he did not know how to dance, proved surprisingly capable once Lucia got him moving, his natural grace translating well to the simple steps. That night, they returned to the cabin as husband and wife. Isaac carried Lucia over the threshold, making her laugh with the old-fashioned gesture, and set her down gently in their home. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a wrapped bundle from his pack. Inside was a mirror, small and beautifully framed in carved wood. The frame featured delicate patterns of mountain flowers and wild animals, each detail rendered with obvious skill and care. "You made this?" Lucia asked, awed by the craftsmanship. "I have been working on it at night when you were asleep," Isaac admitted. "I wanted to give you something special." "Something that might help." Lucia's throat tightened with emotion. "Isaac, this is beautiful. Look in it," he encouraged gently. "Let me show you what I see." With trembling hands, Lucia raised the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her brown eyes bright with unshed tears, cheeks flushed with happiness, lips curved in a tentative smile. She looked alive in a way she had not seen since before her parents' deaths. "What do you see?" Isaac asked, moving to stand behind her so his reflection appeared over her shoulder. "I see." Lucia paused, really looking. "I see someone loved, someone who has survived, someone who is going to be happy." "I see my wife," Isaac said softly, his arms coming around her waist. "I see the woman I will love for the rest of my life. I see beauty and strength and courage." Lucia watched their reflections, this mismatched pair who had found each other against all odds. The massive mountain man and the slender woman, dark and light, wild and civilized, blending into something entirely their own. And then, watching herself in the mirror, Lucia smiled. Really smiled with genuine joy and hope and love. The expression transformed her face, lighting her from within, and she understood what Isaac had been trying to show her all along. Her beauty was not in perfect features or unmarred skin, but in the life that animated her, the love she was capable of giving and receiving, the resilience that kept her moving forward. "There," Isaac said, his own smile reflected in the glass. "That is what I have been waiting to see. That is the woman I fell in love with." Lucia set down the mirror and turned in Isaac's arms, reaching up to cup his bearded face in her hands. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for helping me see myself." "Always," Isaac promised and kissed her. Their first year of marriage passed in contentment. The claim continued to produce well, especially the new areas Isaac had opened. They expanded the cabin, completing the 2 additional rooms and a kitchen with a proper stove Isaac bought with some of their gold. The house felt like a real home, filled with warmth and laughter and the evidence of their shared life. In the spring, Lucia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy tempered by anxiety. Childbirth was dangerous in the best circumstances, and Jackson's doctor was often called away to other settlements. But Dr. Phillips, when consulted, pronounced Lucia healthy and strong and predicted an uncomplicated birth. Isaac became almost comically protective, insisting Lucia rest frequently and forbidding her from the heavier work at the claim. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, understanding it came from love and his fear of loss. Their son was born on a snowy November evening, arriving quickly and with surprisingly little trouble. Dr. Phillips, who had stayed at the cabin for the final week of Lucia's confinement, pronounced mother and baby perfectly healthy. Isaac held his son with infinite tenderness, his large hands cradling the tiny body with exquisite care. Tears streamed unashamedly down his weathered face as he gazed at the miracle in his arms. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Lucia's father, with a middle name of Thomas for Isaac's father. Little James had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and he possessed a robust set of lungs that he exercised frequently and enthusiastically. Parenthood transformed them in ways both exhausting and exhilarating. Isaac, who had lived alone for so many years, proved to be a devoted and capable father. He fashioned a cradle from smooth pine, carved toys, and could soothe James's crying faster than anyone. Lucia, who had feared she would not know how to be a mother without her own mother's guidance, found that love and instinct carried her through the uncertain moments. As James grew from infant to toddler, the claim and their investments in Jackson provided steady income. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, more than comfortable, really. They had enough to be generous with neighbors, to contribute to the building of a new school in Jackson, to buy the books and small luxuries that made life pleasant. When James was 2, Lucia became pregnant again. This time, the birth was harder, a long labor that left her exhausted. But their daughter, named Sarah, after Isaac's mother, with Margaret for Lucia's mother, was worth every moment of pain. She had her father's build, sturdy and strong even as an infant, with her mother's brown eyes and a disposition that was somehow both fierce and sweet. Isaac declared himself the luckiest man alive, his little family the answer to prayers he had not known how to speak. He taught James to track and fish, to respect the wilderness and understand its ways. Lucia taught both children to read, starting them early with simple books that grew progressively more complex. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Isaac suggested they visit the high alpine lake where everything had changed between them. They made it a family expedition, packing supplies for an overnight camp, carrying the children when the trail grew steep. The lake was just as beautiful as Lucia remembered, perhaps more so with the added perspective of time and happiness. They camped on the shore, and after the children were asleep in the tent, Lucia and Isaac sat by the fire holding hands. "You remember what you said to me here?" Lucia asked. "I said many things. You said some things are worth suffering for. You were right. Everything we endured, everything that hurt it led us here, to this." Isaac brought her hand to his lips and kissed her palm. "I spent years running from pain, thinking isolation would protect me. But you taught me that the risk of love is worth taking, that being vulnerable is not weakness but courage." "We taught each other," Lucia said. "I could not see my own worth until you held up a mirror and showed me, literally and figuratively." Isaac laughed, the sound rich and warm in the mountain darkness. "Best mirror I ever made. Do you still have it? The one you carved for me, of course. It is in our bedroom where you look in it every morning." Lucia smiled, remembering how the simple act of seeing her reflection had once filled her with dread. Now it was just part of her routine, unremarkable and unfrightening. She saw a woman who was aging. There were lines forming at the corners of her eyes, threads of silver appearing in her dark hair, but also a woman who was thriving. A mother, a wife, a person who had survived tragedy and built something beautiful on the other side. The next morning, before they broke camp, Lucia carried baby Sarah down to the lake's edge. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky in shades of gold and pink as the sun rose. "Look," Lucia said to her daughter, pointing at their reflection. "See us. That is you and me. We are beautiful." Sarah, not quite a year old, reached toward the water with chubby hands, making happy gurgling sounds. James came running over, Isaac close behind, and soon all 4 of them were crowded at the water's edge, their reflections overlapping and merging into a portrait of family. Isaac wrapped his arms around all of them, his large frame sheltering his wife and children. "This," he said softly, "this is everything." The years that followed brought the normal challenges and joys of raising a family on the frontier. James grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the wilderness as much as his father. Sarah proved to be both clever and stubborn, with a gift for numbers that Lucia nurtured carefully. When Sarah was 5, they had another son, Daniel, who was quiet and thoughtful and showed an early interest in drawing and art. The claim eventually played out, as gold claims do, but by then, Isaac and Lucia had diversified. They bought property in Jackson, opening a trading post that catered to trappers and miners heading into the mountains. Isaac's knowledge of the wilderness made him an invaluable resource, and Lucia's education and business sense kept the accounts properly managed. They also began offering guide services, with Isaac leading hunting and exploration parties into the high country during summer months. It was seasonal work that allowed him to satisfy his need for wilderness while still returning home to his family each night. Lucia started a library in Jackson, beginning with her own collection and gradually adding volumes purchased from the East. She organized reading circles and educational programs, helping to bring culture and learning to the rough mining town. The library became a community center, a place where people gathered not just for books but for conversation and connection. As their children grew, Lucia made sure they understood where they came from. She took them to visit the graves on the hill, telling stories about the grandparents they had never met. James and Sarah and Daniel learned about courage and resilience, about loss and recovery, about building a life on foundations of love and hard work. On Sundays, the family would often hike into the mountains, Isaac teaching the children the skills he had learned during his years of solitude. They learned to read tracks, identify plants, find water, build shelter. But they also learned the things Isaac had discovered later: the importance of community, the strength found in vulnerability, the way love could heal even the deepest wounds. When James was 16, he asked his father about those years before he met Lucia, the time Isaac spent alone in the mountains. They were checking trap lines together, just the two of them, and Isaac considered his answer carefully. "I was running," he finally said. "From pain, from responsibility, from myself. I thought I was being strong, but really I was just afraid." "What changed?" James asked. "Your mother. She needed help and I could provide it. Simple as that at first. But then she showed me that living with fear is braver than running from it. She had lost as much as I had, maybe more, but she kept going. She kept trying. And somehow, being around that kind of courage made me want to be courageous too." "Do you regret those years alone?" Isaac shook his head. "No. I learned things I needed to know, became someone I needed to be. But I am grateful every day that I came down from the mountains when I did. I am grateful I did not waste my whole life hiding." That evening, Isaac recounted the conversation to Lucia as they sat on the porch of their expanded house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Their children were inside, James helping Sarah with mathematics while Daniel drew pictures of the wildlife he had observed that day. "You gave me back my life," Isaac said, taking Lucia's hand. "I want you to know that. I was barely living before, just surviving. You taught me the difference." Lucia squeezed his hand. "We gave each other our lives. I was drowning in grief and you pulled me out. We saved each other." It was true, she reflected. The woman who had been too afraid to look at her own reflection had become someone who faced each day with confidence and joy. The man who had fled civilization had become the cornerstone of a family and respected member of a community. Neither transformation had been easy or quick, but both had been worth the effort. When James turned 18, he announced his intention to attend the new university being established in Laramie. Isaac and Lucia were proud, if a bit sad, to see their eldest preparing to venture into the wider world. Sarah, at 13, declared she would follow her brother's path, perhaps even pursuing studies in mathematics or science. Daniel, at 10, was less certain about his future but showed promise as an artist, his sketches of mountain landscapes remarkably detailed and evocative. On the evening before James left for university, the family gathered for a special dinner. Lucia had cooked all of his favorite foods, and Isaac had brought out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a significant occasion. After the meal, Isaac stood and raised his glass. "To my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are stepping out into a world full of possibilities. Remember what you have learned here about honor, about hard work, about treating people with respect. But also remember that it is okay to be uncertain, to make mistakes, to change your mind. Your mother and I did not have everything figured out when we were your age. We still do not. But we have each other and we have love, and that has been enough." James, tall and strong at 18 with his father's build and his mother's quick mind, raised his own glass. "Thank you, both of you, for showing me what it means to live with courage. I will make you proud." Lucia dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, overwhelmed with love for this young man they had raised, for the family they had built, for the life that had seemed impossible in those dark days after her father's death. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Lucia retrieved the mirror Isaac had carved for her all those years ago. The frame was worn smooth from handling, the flowers and animals etched into the wood familiar as old friends. She looked at her reflection in the lamplight. She was 43 years old now, no longer the young woman Isaac had met. Her face bore the marks of time and experience, lines around her eyes and mouth, silver liberally threaded through her dark hair, a softness to her jawline that had not been there in her youth. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw beauty. Not the conventional beauty of youth or physical perfection, but something deeper and more lasting. She saw a woman who had loved and been loved, who had raised children and built a business and contributed to her community. She saw strength earned through adversity, wisdom gained through experience, grace developed through conscious choice. Isaac appeared in the mirror behind her, his own face marked by time. He was graying at the temples, his beard more silver than brown, his face lined and weathered. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who had held up a mirror and shown her beauty when she could not see it herself. "What do you see?" he asked, echoing the question from so many years ago. Lucia smiled at their reflection, at this portrait of enduring love. "I see us. I see everything we have built together. I see home." Isaac bent to kiss the top of her head, his arms wrapping around her shoulders. "Always," he murmured. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both large and small. James graduated from university and returned to Jackson with a degree in geology, using his education to help miners work their claims more efficiently. Sarah did indeed pursue mathematics, eventually becoming a teacher at the school her parents had helped establish. Daniel's artistic talents led him to opportunities in larger cities, but he always returned to Wyoming, claiming the mountains were his true inspiration. Isaac and Lucia grew older together, their bodies slowing but their spirits remaining vital. They continued to work at the trading post, though they hired younger people to handle the more strenuous tasks. They continued to read together in the evenings, to take walks in the mountains when weather permitted, to share the quiet intimacy of people who knew each other completely. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought together seemingly half of Jackson. Friends and neighbors, customers and colleagues, all gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. Speeches were made, praising Isaac's integrity and wilderness wisdom, Lucia's education and generous spirit. Stories were shared about times they had helped someone, offered guidance, provided comfort. It was a humbling and wonderful evening, a reminder that their lives had touched many others. When it was his turn to speak, Isaac stood with difficulty. His knees troubled him now, particularly in cold weather, and looked out at the assembled crowd. 20 years ago, he began, I came down from the mountains because a young woman needed help. I thought I was doing a good deed, helping someone in a difficult situation. I did not know I was finding my salvation. Lucia Hartley showed me that love is worth the risk, that vulnerability is strength, that building a life with someone is the greatest adventure. Everything good in my life came from that choice to help, to stay, to open my heart. Thank you, my love, for teaching me how to live. Lucia stood and embraced him, unbothered by the crowd watching, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself, she whispered. Thank you for holding up a mirror until I saw my beauty. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. Lucia and Isaac danced together slowly, moving to their own rhythm, lost in each other despite the crowd around them. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, their children approached with a gift. It was a painting Daniel had created, a landscape of the high alpine lake where Isaac and Lucia had first confessed their feelings. The detail was extraordinary, capturing not just the physical beauty but the sense of peace and possibility the place embodied. For your bedroom, Daniel said. So you can always remember. We could never forget, Lucia said, pulling her son into a hug. That place is written on our hearts. The painting was hung above their bed, and for the remaining years of their lives together, it was the last thing they saw before sleeping, and the first thing they saw upon waking. Isaac died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, 17 years after that anniversary celebration. Lucia woke one morning to find him cold beside her, his face serene, one hand still holding hers. The grief was immense but not unbearable. They had had 37 good years together, and she knew how fortunate that made her. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like everyone in Wyoming, Lucia stood and told the story of how they met. She described the notice in the general store, the mountain man who appeared like something from a legend, the slow building of trust and friendship and eventually love. She talked about the mirror he had carved, about learning to see herself through his eyes, about the life they had built together. Isaac Hartley taught me that surviving is not enough, she concluded. We must also live. We must love. We must be brave enough to let ourselves be seen. He was the best man I ever knew, and I am grateful every day that he came down from his mountains when he did. Lucia lived another 12 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, active in the community, still managing the trading post with sharp business sense. She never remarried. Isaac had been her great love, and she felt complete with the memory of what they had shared. On her 80th birthday, her children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. James had 3 children of his own, all grown now with families. Sarah had 4, including a daughter named Lucia after her grandmother. Daniel had 2, and joked that he was too busy with art to manage more. After the meal, Sarah presented her mother with a special gift, the mirror Isaac had carved all those years ago, which Sarah had carefully restored and repolished. The wood gleamed, the carved details as clear as the day Isaac had finished them. "I remember you telling us about this," Sarah said. "About how Papa made it to help you see yourself. I wanted to make sure it was preserved, so we can pass it down through the generations." Lucia held the mirror with trembling hands, overcome with memory and love. She looked at her reflection, an old woman now, face deeply lined, hair completely white, skin thin and spotted with age. But her eyes still sparkled with life, and when she smiled, she saw not the ravages of time but the accumulation of joy. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for understanding how important this is." That night, alone in the house where she had spent most of her adult life, Lucia sat with the mirror and remembered. She remembered the frightened young woman who could not bear to see her own face. She remembered the mountain man who had shown her beauty and strength. She remembered the building of a life, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. She remembered James's birth, the terror and triumph of becoming a mother. She remembered Sarah's fierce determination, Daniel's gentle creativity. She remembered evenings reading Shakespeare, mornings on the mountain trails, afternoons working side by side at the claim or in the store. She remembered Isaac's hands, strong and gentle, holding her through grief and joy. She remembered his voice, soft and certain, telling her he saw beauty where she saw only failure. Most of all, she remembered love. Deep, abiding, transformative love that had taken 2 broken people and made them whole. Lucia Hartley died in her sleep 3 weeks later, peacefully and without pain. Her children buried her beside Isaac on the hill overlooking Jackson with a stone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, and friend, she taught us to see beauty, including our own." The mirror was passed to Sarah, who treasured it and taught her own daughter its story. It became a family heirloom, passed through the generations, along with the tale of the mountain man and the woman who learned to see her own reflection smile. In Jackson, Wyoming, the trading post operated by Isaac and Lucia Hartley became a historical landmark. The library Lucia founded grew into a cultural center. The land they had worked still bore their name, and the community they had helped build remembered them with respect and affection. But perhaps their greatest legacy was simpler than any of that. They had shown each other, and everyone who knew them, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. That seeing beauty in ourselves and others was an act of courage. That building a life together, with honesty and commitment and grace, was the most worthwhile adventure of all. And in a small museum in Jackson, among artifacts from the town's early days, visitors could see a mirror in a frame carved with mountain flowers and wild animals. The placard beside it told the story of Isaac Hartley, who came down from the mountains to help a grieving young woman, and Lucia Garrison, who learned to see her own reflection smile. It told how they had built a life together, raised a family, contributed to their community, and loved each other until death parted them. The story resonated with visitors from around the world, reminding them that sometimes salvation comes when we stop running from pain and instead turn to face it with someone brave enough to hold up a mirror and show us the truth. That we are worthy of love, capable of joy, and more beautiful than we ever imagined. The mirror still hung in the museum, its carved frame worn smooth by generations of hands, its surface bright and clear. And sometimes, when the light hit it just right, visitors swore they could see not just their own reflections, but the faint images of a mountain man and a dark-haired woman, standing together and smiling, their love visible even across the boundaries of time and death, eternal and unchanging as the mountains themselves.